Well, my name is Robert Safran. I'm the executive director of the Jewish Entrepreneur Free Mentoring Organization. We are one of the organizing sponsors of this event. I want to introduce Nik Davidson. Nik Davidson is doing a talk what to do when you don't know what to do, and concrete actions to turn obstacles to opportunities. Nik is a high-level management consultant with Smart Solutions. He's a consultant to C-level management and corporations and nonprofits as well. His clients are typically looking to develop systems and introduce longer-term solutions beyond just firefighting and the consistent roadblocks impeding productivity. His specific focus is on strategy, organization design, operations management, leadership and team development, and change management. In addition to the work he does within his organization, he also does a lot of charitable work, and specifically, he is a mentor for our organization, the Jewish Entrepreneur, giving free mentoring service to folks. And I would have to say, Nik joined us, actually, I think it was at TribeWorks that you came to us last year, and has been mentoring for us since, and is a fantastic mentor, and basically gets outstanding feedback from folks. So I'm looking forward to the presentation. I will turn over to Nik, and I will go offline and go on chat. So it's now up to you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, as Robert mentioned, we have the facility for folks to ask questions. So if you don't mind to have a look, you should have a bar that offers you either chat or Q&A. I do have a couple of colleagues here who'll be monitoring that. And to all intents and purposes, we're going to try to address things at the end. But if there's something you don't follow or I failed to explain adequately, please do tell us at the time, and we'll try to jump in and get back to that. Okay, so what to do when you don't know what to do? Well, I think probably in my 25 odd years experience running companies or departments, I can safely say that the current situation we've all been experiencing is quite unprecedented. In fact, probably can't find a better example of a situation in which people really don't know what's coming next or what to do. So what I thought I'd talk about a little bit today is some of the most common questions we've had over the past 3 months, what people are really concerned about, the kind of questions people are asking, and how to navigate through this unusual set of circumstances. So here are some examples of questions that people have been asking us in the past. I've lost my client base. Sometimes the market really has disappeared. Sometimes it's only temporarily. For example, you're a retail clothing store, your doors are closed, people aren't coming in. How do you navigate through that period? We're going to be talking about another company called MyFold Portable Car Seats. They claim to have the most advanced, compact, and portable booster seats in the world, which is great as long as people are using their cars and going places. Other questions people have been asking us have been connected to ideas about taking their business remote. There are a lack of well-developed systems and processes, and suddenly these are exposed. There's no clear way to manage workloads or people. There are holes that are constantly coming up in your workflow. And folks generally are taking the obvious conclusion out of these circumstances and coming to the conclusion that remote doesn't work. Some folks are finding their problems are more akin to staff issues. Staff are not coming back on board so quickly. I'm sure many of you will have seen in the news over the past 24 hours. There are some changes that may make that situation not quite as prevalent as it is right now. But one way or another, circumstances have changed quite considerably, and you can't just flick a switch and go back to the way things were. Other folks are ready to get back in the saddle. Their problem is, how do I reboot in a smart way? How do I prepare better for a second wave? What can I do to protect my business against this happening again? Then comes planning and structure. As you can see here, many folks are trying to figure out how to plan, but after a year like 2020, how do you develop strategic planning goals? There are a lot of words being bandied about: virtualization, pivoting. I think they're the business jargon catchphrases of 2020. We had disrupt, we had verticals, we had leverage and go lean in the past. These seem to be the new catchphrases, but what do you do? How do you plan in such an uncertain world? So I think the most important insight that I would take away from this particular circumstance is that there are no circumstances that were created by the coronavirus problem. There were problems in businesses beforehand, and those problems were magnified. The problem isn't generally external, but internal. Some examples of some of the issues that have been exacerbated are management. Management had holes in it in terms of how you were able to oversee your processes and your employees. Perhaps when it came to clients, you were over-leveraged in a particular direction, or likewise, key suppliers, the same problem. Or, no different than that, you've got that one employee who, as far as you're concerned, we're going to go to Susan. Susan's got everything in her head. She knows exactly what to do. Only suddenly Susan is not around and available anymore. So the questions business owners really have to ask themselves today is how open are they to adapting, to changing, to pivoting, and to adjusting? It's really a question of changing perspective rather than changing the environment in which we're working. How do we do that? Well, one of the things that my colleagues and I find when we go into businesses with smart solutions is we often ask the business owners for sacred cows, those things in their company that cannot be touched, those things that whatever else we move around, however else we're going to make changes, these things we couldn't and shouldn't touch. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the things that folks told us in the past can't be changed. Remote, we're not open to it. Outsourcing, that's not suitable for my business. Essential is a word that we've heard all too often over this period. But let's rethink what's essential in our businesses. Products, suddenly they're not as essential as we thought they were. The people that we have in our business, in many cases, we've had to replace their function and we've carried on. Processes, we've skipped numerous steps and nothing happened. So how vital was our process? And then comes, of course, independence and accountability. These are ideas that everybody recognizes the value of, but when you're in the hustle and bustle of everyday business, sometimes you get the feeling that structure is not essential for my particular business model. And then Corona hits, and you realize how ultimately essential it really is. So I think I want to go back a little bit in my own personal memory banks to a personal story. This was probably about midway through my career, and it was part of my first segues into the C-level positions. Previous to that, I'd been a manager, I'd been a director, but never quite at that top echelons of a particular organization. I was negotiating on various different terms to join this particular organization. After lengthy negotiations, we were talking about various different things and I asked a question. I asked about PTO and vacation. I wanted to get a clear idea as to what would be expected from me and what would be the terms of my employment. There was a pause with the person I was speaking to, the chairman of the organization, and he looked at me for a second and he took a bit of a deep breath and he said, I'm a little concerned that perhaps you haven't really understood what this role is all about. So I gulped, thought to myself, okay, that was the wrong question. But he elaborated a little bit and explained, Nick, we're bringing you in at this point to build and run this entire organization. Any policies, any procedures, anything that's happening there, you've got carte blanche to figure out what you think is in the best interest of the organization and what's the best interest of you being able to do your job. And that was an important lesson for me. The lesson was that although we'd had probably 2 weeks worth of conversations and negotiations about this particular role and what they wanted me to do, I'd listened, but I hadn't really listened. What I needed to do was really listen and shift my mindset. This wasn't a problem or a department or an issue that needed dealing with like all the other issues I dealt with in the past. This was a whole new world, and I hadn't really adjusted my mindset effectively enough. Since then, I would say that's probably one of the most important lessons I've learned. And I would go as far as to say that right now with SSG, the Smart Solutions Group, the company I'm part of, when we go into companies, I would say perhaps the greatest value we provide is asking insightful questions, the right questions. When you really ask the right questions, at the end of the day, the answers are pretty evident for anybody in the room. It won't take a rocket science to figure out what the answer to that question is. The question is, can you really identify what the right question is to ask? Today, we're going to cover a few different points, as you see here on the slide. And I don't want to belittle the fact that we are in a time of huge uncertainty. And it really is very difficult to predict exactly what's going to come next and what direction we should go. but at the same time, there's all sorts of vital information available. The most critical issue for decision makers, for business owners, for managers, is do they have their ear to the ground? Are they, as we said, asking the right questions? It's about how and why you formulate them and who you ask them to. And I will say that of the countless people we meet, way too few of the people we're talking to have identified who their informers are, nor do they focus enough on the wisdom they could gain from those particular people. So I want to talk to you about Bob Sager. Bob Sager is somebody I haven't actually met in person. We're connected on LinkedIn, and I've seen a lot of the different ideas that he's shared. And he has a very interesting approach to questions. Bob says, ask yourself a seemingly ridiculous question. What if questions? So for example, what if you had a media company that produced no content? You'd end up with Facebook. A taxi company that owned no vehicles. That's how you think of something like Uber. And what if you had an overnight accommodations company that owns no properties? So many of the greatest things we have, greatest ideas, the most novel approaches have come from asking seemingly ridiculous questions. But how do we adjust ourselves to the mindset of asking questions? There's another fellow I'd like to talk about today. His name is Dan Pink. Dan Pink is a researcher and writer. He's prolific, but I first came across him in the Daily Telegraph a couple of decades ago. So Dan brought to my attention a particular piece of research that was done in the University of Illinois. There was a group of people who were segmented into two sections, group 1 and group 2, and they were presented with a series of tasks. We're going to call them anagram problems. Each one of the groups was asked to rearrange letters of words like source to come up with a word like cause. Pretty straightforward. So these two groups were asked to deal with their challenge by being primed with something a little bit different in advance. Each group was given different self-talk as preparation. One group was told to declare, I will, as part of the statements of affirmation that they would say before they were walking into their particular challenge. And in fact, we're very familiar with these ideas. Sports psychology today has come on leaps and bounds, and we have many athletes who are visualizing success beforehand and talking them through in a very confident, declarative way. I will do this. This is my goal. This is what I'm going to achieve. The next group, he had take a different approach. That group was a little more uncertain. They were told to phrase the statements beforehand with can I, and to question whether in fact they could be successful in these particular tasks that were set up to them. Well, there was a very significant difference in results. Far more success was with the group that said, can I? Which is quite surprising. So they came and tried to change the exercise with another two groups, and they did it in a slightly different way. Under the guise of telling them they were doing a handwriting test, they had them do, first of all, an exercise where they had to rewrite various different statements and were told that their handwriting was going to be analyzed. The pretense of one group was that many of the statements they were writing had the words I will, and in the second group, in a similar way to we just discussed, they were writing statements that started with will I and can I. What was the result? The same result. Actually, those folks that were writing or saying things like can I beforehand were doubly as successful as those folks who went in with a very confident approach. So that's really questionable to us. What's happening over there, right? So really the idea of a conversation, of approaching things from this position is to start from a position of humility, thinking maybe we don't know the answer, then to look at it from a perspective of collaboration. Let's listen, let's think, and maybe a collaboration is even with ourselves. However, the approach that we're going to take is one where we're really going to ask a question rather than move into it saying we've been here before and we know what to do. What really comes out of this particular exercise, at least for me, was asking, can we fix it? Broadens the possibility of finding the optimal way of fixing it. So here we have a picture of our basketball man. And this was an idea I took from John Goldman, another good LinkedIn personality and a colleague of mine in the consulting world. So he draws a lot of attention to the idea of a pivot, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit today. So we've got an opportunity that Corona has provided. The challenge is really to move from a position of stress and anxiety, as many people are finding themselves, into a position of purposeful direction and moving towards a bright future. Now, pivoting, as you can see from this diagram, there are 3 specific moves as you go 180 degrees from one side all the way to the other through that 180-degree angle. And actually, if you continually turn, keeping your pivot foot, as you can see the fellow with his pivot foot on the blue circle, locked in position, there's one part of you that stays completely in place and the rest of your body keeps moving around. This is akin really to the idea of a tree trunk. A tree trunk is steadfast, which is representative, I think, of the core of what you do, whereas the branches of a tree are the continual outgrowths, the free form, the mind map part of what we do, always looking to explore new opportunities. Sometimes those branches, of course, are cut off when they no longer are producing anything viable, and other times they grow into such a wonderful growth that ultimately they're the foundation of a new independent tree. So for a business pivot, it's really a continuous cycle of 3 things. Listen, think, and ask. Actually, you always want to feel like you don't know what to do. Nothing to do with the coronavirus, because it's only then when you start figuring out what you really should be doing. And that's the real opportunity that the Corona Reset has provided. We need to ask ourselves questions like, why do I do this? Is there a different way? Staff, do I need them for the same reasons I did before? Have things changed? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What about this system? Does it need to be this way? Is my market segment really the market segment I should be going after? Meetings, employees, really start reevaluating and asking all of these questions. Likewise with marketing. So the real question to ask ourselves moving forward is this. We need to really investigate what need are we filling, how else can we fill it, and really hone down on our core unifying direction question. What do my people need from me now? And of course, how would you find that out? So folks in the marketing segment of companies, sales, what should they be doing? Well, one question to ask yourself is, who are your informers? Who are those folks who are going to tell you what's going on at the grassroots, and how much time are you spending on that? We're in a situation right now where many of the sales folks that I'm speaking to are stuck and the marketing folks are marginalized. They're asking what to do. A lot of conversations like that, for example, on LinkedIn. The best advice I've seen suggested on LinkedIn is you try to maintain your relationships. You should bond around things like homeschooling or Zoomophobia and just try to cultivate those relationships. And I think, no, actually, that's not what you should be doing. Yes, you want to show you can care. It's even better if you actually really would care. But although it's important at a business level to cultivate these relationships, you mustn't stop there. For marketing, for business development, for sales, these are the most critical folks right now who are standing on the precipice of the future of an entire company. It's all on you. And the question is, what could you be doing with your time? Here are some of the questions that you could be asking. Start thinking a little bit about all these different ideas of what you do, what you've done before, and go to solicit feedback from them in the realm of product research and development. So let's talk about a particular company. We've got MyFold. I mentioned them before. They're grab and go flat car seats. You can see here in the picture. What could they do? If you're responsible for marketing at MyFold, what would you do? No one's buying MyFold car seats. They're not really going in the car. They're not really going into kindergarten. Corona, well, they're hardly going to be selling PPE equipment. That's not really their realm. So what could they do? So again, on a basic superficial level, they can create fun, engaging ideas for what to do with your kids. After all of their customers have kids. What can you do at home? Maybe you can use MyFold to entertain your kids in lockdown. How can you use a MyFold in the kitchen, in the living room? It's okay, but it's a little shallow. Whilst it's good to engage, the question is, where's the real gold? The real value is in product development. These kind of questions are what they should be asking to their clients. At a certain point, people will be buying car seats again. RV trips are the vacation everyone is talking about post-corona, places like West Virginia. And then front of mind will be my fold when the time comes. The only difference is they'll really understand how to better meet their clients' greatest needs. They'll have identified the MVN, the most valuable need for their clients. Instead of just bonding over superficial conversations, there's a wonderful opportunity for them over here. Let's look at another example. What if you're a personal designer clothes boutique? So we had a conversation about a client like that about 2-3 weeks ago. People had stopped coming into this particular store. No one's buying clothes. After all, you only really need a shirt for Zoom these days. So what should the owner of that particular business be doing? So she came up with the idea of having videos online to engage customers a little bit and talking about some of her products. But really, there was an opportunity to go so much further, to ask clients, what did you like most in the past collection? What was missing? Let them be part of the process of you selecting and buying your new styles. Heighten the anticipation when it does become a time that they can come into your store, and customize your offerings to an audience that you normally don't have anywhere near as captive as you do right now, sitting in their living room, looking for something to do. You can stop working so hard to sell products that might not be what people actually want. So now, our store owner is doing one-on-one appointments as things slowly start up, but with a far more engaged audience, and meeting their particular needs by having a range of products that are really matching what they're looking for. So an action for you folks today, within the next 24 to 48 hours, marketing and business development efforts should be focused on listening, upgrading the quality of your thinking, and asking the right questions. Now, we know big brands do this all the time. They have entire departments set up for this. But what an opportunity this is right now for the small businesses, the overworked, understaffed marketing folks who usually are way too busy to spend time on this. But actually, they can provide tremendous value for their companies. Second part I'd like to talk about today is about the adaptation we need to have during this period. We know innovation and change are coming. You can be the change, you can watch it. We know you need to stand out. We know that rules are being rewritten. We know that all bets are off. We know you need to stand aside from your competition. The question is, how do you adapt to new normal or redefine it? Can you turn a product to a service? Can you turn a service to a product? Key question again, what can I do to increase value? Now let's explore the process you use for creative kind of thinking that would be necessary to do this, to really answer this question. So here we come back to Dan Pink. I mentioned him before, he's one of my favorites. And about 15 years ago, he popularized the idea of flip thinking. Flip thinking is about trying to start a creative process by turning the old way of doing things on their head and seeing if you can come up with a possible improvement. So I'd like to give you a few examples that he spoke about. First of all, he spoke about this was about 25 years ago actually, a school teacher called Carl Fish. Carl Fish was from Denver, Colorado, and he was struggling to maintain engagement in his lessons. Folks were nodding off, weren't really able to focus during this 50-minute periods that they had. And then those same students were going home. They were doing their maths homeworks, but they were struggling to apply what they learned in the lessons in their homework. And of course, what do you end up then with? Something I think many of us parents are all familiar with, which is that you've got parents sitting around trying to do homework with their kids for hours on end. So Carl Fish was a bit different, and he looked at that and thought, this isn't really working, there must be a better way. And over time, he came up with the idea of recording his lectures for students to watch at home. So you'd go home, you'd flick on your YouTube, and they'd be able to watch a lecture, pause it when they were losing interest, rewind if they missed something, and watch the lessons that way, over and over again if they wanted to. What about the maths problems for homework? Those he did during the lesson time. All the students would be in class, he'd be walking around up and down the class in different rows, trying to help people as they collaborated and tried to do their homework. And when you have an idea like that, you sit and think, what were we thinking about originally? Another idea, book publishers. This was an idea that Seth Godin, the marketing guru, proposed in his flip. So he spoke about the idea that when you have a new book that's released, what happens? It normally comes out in a $25 hardcover first. And then after a period of months, maybe a year, comes the cheaper paperback. Seth said, that doesn't make much sense. Why are we trying to get people to buy this $25 hardcover They don't really know who the author is often. They don't really know what the book's about. Maybe we should have people take a chance on an $8 paperback first. Let's try to build up a following. Let's see if it sells well. And then on the coattails of that following, now we can look at selling a commemorative hardcover for $25. Again, makes sense when you think about it that way. And then the last example I like to bring, my favorite, healthcare. Healthcare, that wonderful system that seems destined for a reboot with every administration that comes into power. No matter which country you're in, nobody's able to quite figure out healthcare. Well, several generations back, somebody called Li Shizhen introduced a very innovative approach to healthcare in China. He said, let's do it this way. Doctors are paid a monthly stipend for every month you're healthy. Otherwise, that stipend should get reduced. Ashwin Nayak brought this to my attention, and it's such an incredible idea. After all, success in the healthcare field would seem to be really something that's dependent on when you don't need the doctor. In a similar way to Dan Pink, Bob Sager, who we spoke about before, has a wonderful theme as well called Go Opposite. He works in a very similar approach, asking, look at how things are done in your company. How is marketing done? How is sales conducted? What about admin, finance, R&D? Maybe you could ask a question. Is it possible to do the exact opposite of what we're doing right now? Or maybe even what our competitors are doing? Maybe it might be better to do that. How would it be better? Here's an example of a company that did that. Tony Hsieh, famous CEO from Zappos, in his book Delivering Happiness, spoke about the idea of taking all the marketing spend, all the money that they would spend on advertising, and putting it instead into the customer experience. And we know what a wonderful success that was. As Tony says, let our customers be our marketing. And here's a particular favorite of mine, the 2015 Super Bowl campaign. As we know, ad space during the Super Bowl commercials is the holy grail. So what did Volvo do? Well, Volvo decided during the competitors' commercials, they'd offer a competition for folks to tweet the name of the car that they were most interested in and a person to nominate that they'd like to get that car for free. All you needed to do was anytime a car commercial came on during the Super Bowl, tweet to Volvo the name of the car and the name of the person you want to nominate. Over that period, there were 2,000 tweets per minute, and Volvo were the only car company to trend nationally and globally. $60 million in advertising was spent by 9 other car manufacturers, and all of that spend was directed to Volvo. Actually, 60% increase in the actually I think it's 70% increase in the XC60 car came as a result of this particular campaign. This all came about by the folks at Volvo asking, how can we do this when everybody else in their market was convinced they already knew the answer? Another brainstorm session, ideally best done within the next 24 to 48 hours. What can you change? A process, a practice, a method, or a business model that could be flipped in your business? Now let's go to another module, what I like to call OUR. That's why we've got a picture of our pirate there. So OUAR stands for the optimal use of assets and resources. A pirate, when he comes in and takes your assets, is only concerned with one thing. Ruthlessly, how can I get the greatest value out of these assets and resources? So that's a creativity that we should be looking for in this current situation now, where some of our assets and resources are not quite what they were. We're going to talk about a particular method that legends of creativity like Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci used. It's called combinatory play. What do? Well, you take 10 objects and you split them into 2 columns. Then you try to combine them. You make a link between dog and car, or shirt and pen, and try to imagine new possibilities of businesses, products, or services. Because of the way our minds think, generally you're going to have images and possibilities start coming to mind, all sorts of new ideas. Many of those ideas, in fact, probably 85%, will be crazy and completely useless. But with any blue sky exercise, you only really need to turn up 1 or 2 great ideas that can be exactly what your business needs. Only I'm suggesting you don't necessarily do this with random words. but you think about your assets and your resources and you put them up on the wall. Again, get 2 lists of 5 and brainstorm. Come up with a mind map with different types of themes and ask yourself these questions. For example, maybe you're a travel company. You've got a quality capable team. You work well under pressure. You're all detail orientated. You've got a sophisticated website with an amazing back-end infrastructure. Only nobody's traveling. Well, what about booking virtual conferences and events? Kind of like the one we're in right now. You could partner with speakers, networking event coordinators, and suddenly you're harnessing the power of all those different resources you've got and finding a great need and a great opportunity in today's market. Well, how do you come up with ideas like this, and where can it help you? So they'll give you 2 or 3 examples now. Post-it notes. They came from somebody trying to develop a super strong glue. It wasn't, but it was particularly useful when it came for Post-it notes for 3M. Velcro. Velcro was discovered by a fellow who was trying to detach a burr from a dog's coat. Burr's like a little thistle, and it was all entangled there. So ideas that we would have. Let's go again with another example, maybe a car park in the city. Nobody's really bringing their cars into the city. What could you do there? So maybe there you should be looking for things that you could combine with other industries. Think about different industries. You've got your car park. What could the catering industry do with that? Fashion industry, entertainment industry, or in a different approach altogether? Let's say, for example, you're a nursery group teacher. What are you great at? What did you used to do to work? You sold arts and craft packages to parents for kids to do at home. Now suddenly you're bringing your business into their homes in a different way. So these are the questions you should be asking yourself with every asset you've got. Assets also aren't always physical property. Sometimes they're intellectual property, and sometimes they're skills. Adaptability, confidence, networking abilities, enrolling skills, problem-solving skills, communication skills, execution ability. You should really be looking for opportunities to consolidate and to collaborate. Are there other businesses or markets that you could support with your assets? Again, a brainstorming opportunity to do within the next 24 to 48 hours. And with your own particular skills, ask yourself, how? Or with whom? Which other industries? What about my circumstances? Can I change them? What about partners, folks that were previously clients? These are questions to look at when you look at those lists of resources, of assets, and of skills. Let's move on now to the 4th module. We're talking here about people and structure. How could things work differently there? Well, let's look at things like incentive systems. Prevailing wisdom contends to the contrary, and the accepted approaches that businesses take. But really, contrary to that, many people feel that they don't really work. There's way too much focus on a complex system, and the more you tweak it, the more the behavior of the employee you're trying to motivate is still focused now on trying to adjust with that and selling the product. So what about a radical new idea? How about you just pay more than your competition? Give a better base and a bigger profit share than your competition might. Forget incentives. You attract top talent. After all, you're paying better. There's less turnover. Why would people want to leave? And greater focus where you want it, on your business, service, and product, and how to sell it. What about within the sales team? There's going to be a lot more collaboration and commitment. Now, this isn't always the solution, but then why did anybody ever think that that was the case with other examples? We've got the same concept with vacation. What about if you didn't have a policy? What about if staff were answering calls from home? Well, I think that's happening right now. What if they're taking projects and deal with them after hours? Rather, we should focus on what people get done, not 9 to 5, not which days I'm in work, but rather, what am I getting done? Netflix do this. They talk about autonomy. They talk about giving people an opportunity for accountability. Maybe this idea is how you can handle your staff and their needs post-corona. Give them flexibility, autonomy, recognition, and all the things they've appreciated over this period. Steve Swasey, who's Netflix Vice President for Corporate Communication, is quoted over here. And he says this is what they do. The same goes for expenses. Employees don't need approval to spend money on entertainment or travel or gifts. Instead, as far as Netflix is concerned, the only thing they should be focused on is act in Netflix's best interests. It sounds delightfully adult. This is what happens at Netflix if you don't produce. Acceptable is not the norm. It's go above and beyond. But we give you that freedom and responsibility, says Steve, which is long considered fundamentally incompatible. And actually at Netflix, they go together quite well. So another idea to do is to open your mind and think over the next week with another brainstorm. Remember, systems are not there to catch people. They're not there to find out what people are doing wrong. If those are your problems, you should really look at getting new people, but give them an environment with which to flourish. An environment like the environment they've had before, that they can come back to work and find that same amount of freedom, flexibility, and autonomy. Now, how do we get that accountability? Well, what about self-evaluation? Is that even possible? I saw a brilliant article actually that was talking about an example of the lack of feedback that many employees sometimes receive. It spoke about the example of Roger Federer. We all know Roger Federer. He's a record-winning tennis champ. He spends his days hitting millions of tennis balls back and forth over a net and gets paid handsomely for it. But imagine Roger was only given feedback in the form of a once-a-year annual review where he sits down with a coach or a manager who sits there and evaluates him and tells him how he did over the past year in the million balls he hit over the net. It sounds ludicrous. So let's look at a different way. What about if every month an employee were to identify their own performance goals and learning goals? Then, at the end of the month, they formally self-evaluate. They ask themselves questions like, how am I doing? Where am I making progress? Where am I falling behind? What tools or info do I need to do the job better? Another approach is software. We all use project management tools these days, and many of them have the ability to solicit feedback from colleagues in an anonymous way, where at the end of each project, you can ask, where can I improve? And get a lot of information there. Another idea of what you can do. Now, of course, these things may not be the answer for every situation, but the point is how many potential answers there are. If you just ask the questions in the right way, if in a safe space, you explore blue sky thinking. Let's move on now to systems and processes. What is the point of a system? Isamar Ginsberg has a wonderful acronym. This is what systems are all about. When looking at a system, we have to look at it in the context of a habit, our highest and best use of our time. So let's look at various different parts and think about that. A system like remote. We should be listening and thinking what worked and what didn't. Why didn't it work? And what are the benefits of the experience I just had while we were working remotely? Think about that a little bit. And maybe then we can explore adjustments and ask. Outsource. Well, sometimes we should ask ourselves the question, what's my speciality, my unique offering, our special sauce, and really listen to the answers that our clients will tell us. For example, let's say we're an Amazon business. Is it the way we ship? Is that our specialty? How we purchase items? How we get clients? We need to think about things like that. And then, why don't we outsource other things? The things that other people can do better than we can. It can remove the bandwidth from us and allow us to focus our attention on our business and therefore ask ourselves the right questions. Automating forces us to go into a framework where we have to focus on those things that are really important. Look at things from a cost-benefit analysis perspective. After all, things like assembly lines only really came as a result of thinking in an automated way. And another benefit, of course, is it reduces errors. What about delegating? So delegating is really not just about one person delegating things off their plate, but it's about a culture that needs to exist in every company. People should be constantly analyzing and thinking, what could I delegate here? What are the things that I don't do really well? What's my primary role and responsibility and how I produce value? If I'm good at sales, why am I spending time with customer service? The focus needs to be continually about creating value amongst everybody and everything in the organization. Now, of course, you need to encourage training and you need to replace the function in a collaborative type of way to make sure that there's really reciprocal accountability for those things that need to get done. And although we know that the core of scaling is all about delegation, don't forget the QA pass, quality assurance. That's usually what's missing when delegation fails. The checks and the balances and the oversight, but not that delegation itself is not vital to every company. Also, there's the idea of things becoming obsolete. When's the last time you looked at those things you've been doing time and again and seeing what no longer adds value? The real thing for us to do in these circumstances is to be able to go back and really think, what can I do to free up my time and make sure I'm focused on those areas where I provide the greatest value? As we move to the last part now, I'd like to talk about goals, plans, and strategies. We still need goals, we still need plans, we need to have our bearings, our North Star of knowing which direction we're heading in, even though we're in such unprecedented, uncertain times. SD Rand, another LinkedIn personality and colleague, has a great segment that I recommend people looking at where it talks about archetypes and strengths, which are very useful in understanding how to design plans around your particular strengths. And I'd like to focus on three pieces today. First of all, a strategy. Point of a strategy is a plan to reach a goal. If you don't have a plan, your goal is rather worthless. What is that plan? Well, it's not throwing spaghetti against the wall or some unrealistic, big, massive goals that you don't have any plans to reach. It's a real goal with a real plan, one that gives you confidence to get to that goal. It's fine to have a stretch goal. That's ideal, but understand that's a stretch. Most important with any plan at all is you have to know what success is going to look like long before you get there, and you need to identify it in advance. It was pretty obvious with a company called Smart Solutions, I was going to talk about this SMART process when it comes to goals. Specific, focused and clear, not vague. Your goals have to be measurable. What gets measured gets managed. You need to track all forms of data. Cash coming in and out your business, people, anybody coming in and out your world, and likewise activities, whether it's time if you're in the consulting realm, or inventory depending on your business. Is it achievable, realistic? Is it aligned and valuable? And is there, most importantly, a deadline? Last part with marketing is that any marketing message must meet all of the following four criteria. Once upon a time when I was in college, there were 4 Ps: price, product, place, and promotion. I'd like to contend that they've been replaced with CENT. Commit. With real conviction, you convince the target to take a defined action. Are you effectively communicating the need? It's all about how and where you communicate, channels, messaging, and so on. Need creation, the value perception. Are you solving a problem with your price point, with your branding? Is it fit with that need? And targeted. Are you directing it towards your client and customers and the appropriate market? So let's go to the summary. There's a 3-point pivot. Listen carefully and with a really open mind. Sometimes you need to initiate this process by asking the right questions to the right people. You need to think in an entirely new way. Not how you've come about thinking about these problems in the past, but rather trying to get to the core of the issue. And finally, to ask yourselves or your team those ridiculous questions we spoke about before. How can you make your offering superior to the competition, as we spoke about before? New market opportunities. How can you enhance attractiveness? How can you add value? How can you repurpose your assets with diversification, collaboration, new products, services, or models? Find ways to think that you and your customers can win bigger. Flip thinking. We spoke about all these different ideas, and there are many more I'm happy to share. Staff and systems. We need to automate, to delegate. We need to understand what's outdated. RACI is a concept we didn't quite get to today, but something I'm happy to talk to you about and send information to those folks who would like to know more. And our staff, are we finding an environment that's flexible, autonomous, and a way to recognize people? And are we systemizing processes in a simple, clear, codified, replicable, and manageable way? Here's our contact information. I'd be happy to answer questions now, or if people would like a copy of the presentation or some of the additional information we didn't get to, or if you'd like to figure out how to apply these ideas in your business or department. We'd be very happy to talk about any of those particular things. And anybody who contacts us still this week, any consultations will be free of charge. I'm going to just turn it over to my colleagues now to see if we have any questions or things that have come up in the chat. And I appreciate you joining us today.